Well, recently the AFA, the American Floorcovering Alliance, announced the formation of something called the Council of Flooring Industry Advisors, the CFIA. This is a referral network. They have a number of experts, a variety of disciplines, and are making this available to various players in the floor covering industry. One of those experts is Rich Burkemper. He is the owner of RJB Associates. Rich, it's great talking with you. It's been a while.
Same here, Dave. It has been a while.
That you had headed Mohawk International for a number of years. I interviewed you a number of times there, which is always great to learn what's happening in the rest of the world. And where I see you fitting here is large and smaller organizations are interested in international exposure. And I guess that's ever changing. Talk about the potential, a smaller player, now we're talking about both hard and soft surface, to look at various international markets, and that's basically what you would do. What's the potential there?
Well, again, it's not strictly being an American company trying to go overseas. I'm actually talking to people overseas that want to come to America.
Okay.
And depending on the currency, depending on their expertise, the quality of the product they've got, the uniqueness of the product they've got, all determines whether that's appropriate or not. The big players they're global already to one degree or another. But when I look at the smaller players, if they're a niche player, there is a possibility for them. Many of the European companies would like to come to the United States. Many of the Asian companies, especially China, would come to the United States. But no matter which way they go, whether we're going overseas or they're coming here, they've got to understand the market. They've got to understand the selling philosophy. And my experience back to when I was in the rubber business, or even when I was at Forbo, was you got to understand the local market. And many of these people, they don't have a knowledge of the local market, and they don't have the time or the money to invest in to learn about it. But if they don't, then they're destined to fail. A company coming from Europe that tries to market their product in the United States the same as they market it in Europe, it doesn't have the same appeal. The big issue, you're going commercially, because that's a big part of the product line that goes back and forth global is commercial. And that commercial product, if it's got a very technical look to it, their architect folder's got a very technical, it's very hard for them to get the architect and designer here in the United States to pull it off the shelf. Because the architect here and designer in the United States, our designer, they're really focused on color, design, and technical merits is kind of assumed. If the book looks strictly technical, they're not as inclined to pull it off the shelf as if it has some kind of color appeal or design appeal to it. So many of the people that I'd be talking to overseas, they have to rethink, they have to redesign their marketing program to meet the needs coming to the United States. If it's a United States company going overseas, it's the same thing, the same in reverse. So they've really got to understand that. And the other thing, if they're coming to the United States, they've got to understand the distribution system here. It looks wonderful. We're one currency. We're one language, more or less. You can cover the whole world of the North America basically overnight. You get 370 million people in here. You get another 25 million in Canada. You get Mexico in there. It looks really rosy when you're overseas looking here. But the reality is that this market is very fragmented. What sells in the Southwest does not necessarily sell in New England, doesn't sell in Florida. It all kind of varies, and you got to understand that. The thinking of the people in the Midwest is different than the people in New York City. And many of these firms from outside the United States, their thought process is, number one, is New York City is the United States, and that's a major mistake. If they're an international player, they know a lot of the mills here. They may know Dalton, Georgia. They may know a few of the other hubs of where product is made, but they really don't understand the diversity within the United States. Same thing is true going overseas. It's a little easier to understand going overseas because if you're a U.S. company and you decide you want to go to Europe, the topic of conversation in Europe right now is Greece. Well, Greece is a very small part of overall Europe, but it emphasizes the fact that there's differences over there. Majority of what is sold in Europe, in Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain, all those countries that are struggling right now, is hard surface. When you go to the northern part of Europe, it's a lot more carpet being sold. But then there's a that gets messed up too, because if you go to Sweden or Scandinavian countries, you're right back to hard surface again. So you really got to understand that, and you got to understand the history of why that is, to understand you're not going to go over there and change all that. People here in this country think that, well, it works in America, it's going to work over there. Or people in Europe think it works in Europe. It doesn't work that way.
Well, it seems like there's still stories with European companies coming over here doing it the way they've done it and not working. And of course, lots of stories vice versa with U.S. companies.
It's the same both ways. And you've really got to, I went to INSEAD University over in France in 1992, I think it was. And the one thing they drilled into us was you got to think global, because you got to look at that global vision, but you really got to act on a local basis. And most companies don't understand that. So it's a difficult.
I know you're right. Frank's here and he's got a luncheon appointment, so he has to get out pretty.
Okay.
Okay.
Would you say there's potential for smaller companies globally, and I think maybe hand-pick opportunities, Europe, Asia, South America, I suppose?
Well, South America is pretty much, in the floor covering business, is attuned to much of what's going on in North America. When you leave South America, you go to Asia, predominantly it's hard surface. If you're going to have a hard surface product and you're going to try to market it there, you're almost going to have a manufacturing operation there, because, or you're going to have an extremely niche product that somebody really wants in that market that they can't get anyplace else. Made in America sounds great over there, but you're at least 30 days to get it there. You've got other manufacturers that are local. You got manufacturers in India, you got manufacturers in Indonesia. So you've got to be able to compete against those manufacturers. And if you think about China, which is that huge elephant that's out there to go after, they've got a ton of manufacturers in China that they're good quality. They're not all poor quality. We get a lot of the negatives here about their quality. But you've really got to have a product that hits a niche, and there aren't many of those out there.
So then, for a smaller player, the place to look would be a place other than China as a general rule.
Unless he's got a strong niche product. But it really depends on the product. It depends on his stomach for marketing and advertising to that market, how to put his sales organization together. Most cases he's going to want to go through agents, because he can't afford to hire his own sales force in that area. The other thing that I haven't mentioned at all is the currency situation. The last year, currency has changed anywhere from 20-25% up to 40%, depending on where you're at. It makes products from the United States going overseas very, very expensive. The reverse is true. Now all of a sudden it's economical to come to the United States. But what happens when people come to the United States with those low prices, when the currency starts to change, and it does, it fluctuates, the people in the United States don't have the stomach for that fluctuation in the currency. They're used to one currency. They want to have a guaranteed price. And when you got that kind of fluctuation, and 10 to 25% is not unrealistic to expect that from time to time. It's very, very difficult to compete.
I guess one thing for me, what is the population? 1.4 billion or something like that in China? Probably more than that now.
1.5, close to 1.5 billion, right?
It would seem like a marginal product can be super successful in terms of what we know here in the United States.
Well, it can, but you got to remember that 1.5 billion, when I first started going to China, I mean, we targeted 1% of the market, because that's all the people that could afford. Today, you're going to be targeting somewhere between 3 and 5%. Not everybody can afford it. They've got cash. Their cash is either in a bank or it's in their home, stored away someplace, but they've got cash to spend that small percentage. But you can't target 1.5 billion people. They haven't grown that much at this point in time. They are growing, they're growing fast, they're growing very sophisticated. Last time I was in China, it wasn't uncommon to see people walking down the street with 2 cell phones, one in each ear, talking at the same time. It was a big thing for them. When I first went to China, which was only back in 97, 98, somewhere around in there, if you wanted to watch television, you had to go to the village elder to watch TV. In a village, it was not a village. They called it a village, but it was 1 million people lived there. But telephones were just not heard of at that point in time. They bypassed that. Computers were unheard of. They're becoming very sophisticated very fast. Their growth rate has slowed, but but it was out of sight. I mean, how long can you sustain 10, 12% growth?
Yeah.
And the United States would be ecstatic. They're saying next year 6.4% growth. We'd be ecstatic to have that kind of growth.